So in the fabrication of bite blocks, we need to have a stable base made out of light-cure material, as well as incorporate an occlusal rim on top of it. So this is the example that we showed earlier. So this base is made out of light-cure material, which is very hard and rigid. And at the same time, we incorporated an occlusal rim to somewhat simulate the final product. Although it's in wax, that we can utilize later on at the maxillomandibular stage to establish certain measurements and establish the relationship of the mandible to the maxilla. But going back to our master cast now, we need to consider of blocking out any visible undercuts for the upper model as well as the lower model. The other additional thing that we need to consider for the maxillary cast is to incorporate a posterior palatal seal. And this is, by doing so, we're going to depress the soft palate a little bit when the case is inserted, finally inserted, processed and inserted, to enhance the suction effect. So if you follow me along with your casts, we have the two little depressions here, the palatini foveae. So in some scenarios, you might go in front of the palatini. In some scenarios, you might go just posterior to it. So for our particular case here, we're gonna go just posterior to that, almost right at the edge of the cast. You can outline this with any colored pencil. And we want to establish the vibrating line, which is exactly what I'm doing here now, from Hemler notch, just posterior to the palatini foveae, all the way to Hemler notch. And also establish the junction between the soft and hard palate. Now, in some areas, it's a little more, in some scenarios, it's a little more noticeable than others. The example that I used earlier from the impression, if I can just bring that back into the screen, this is another different case, but we can clearly see here, there's the palatini foveae. There's a little projection now because this is a negative replica of the arch. And in all probability, I'm gonna stay just posterior to that. And you can almost see this little bulge being the soft palate here. On one side and the other, which has a characteristic butterfly effect. And I think in the models that you have in front of you now, or if you're just watching the video, we're gonna have this effect here. Now, generally speaking, this outline is about 4 to 6 millimeters here. And it's about 6 to 8 here. And I say generally speaking because it will vary from size to size with different arch forms and sizes, of course. So what we need to do first, we need to scribe, we need to score this model. And I'll use a different color pencil. And we're gonna do about halfway now. So this is the halfway point between the Hemler notch and the mid-palatal suture. At this halfway point, over our vibrating line, we're going to score the model about 1.5 millimeters deep. And as we approach the Hemler notch on either side, here, And also, as we approach the midpoint, we are going to ease up and we're going to come almost to nothing. So we're going to start 1.5 and then slowly taper towards the semler notch, slowly taper towards the mid-palatal suture, go back and score heavier here, back to 1.5, and then slowly taper again to the semler notch. You can do this using various instruments. You can use your number 7 spatula, you can use your Lacron, you can use whatever fits the scenario and whatever works for you. So I'm going to start off using the number 7 spatula. I have my model anchored to the table. I have my right hand that I'm holding my instrument with anchored to the desk as well. And I'm going to start at that point where I'm going to go the deepest that I think I can. And that's about 1.5 millimeters. And then work my way to either side towards the semler notch. And now I'm going to go the other way as I'm crossing the midline. I'm going to ease up with the pressure. And now that I've crossed the midline, the midpoint now between the midline and the semler notch on the other side, I'm going to go 1.5 there. So I'm going to start here again. And now I'm going to pick up where I left off to join the two together and then continue to the other side and taper towards the semler notch on the right side. So I'm starting with with no score line here, progressively scoring deeper as I get between the midpoint, between the semler notch and the midline, easing up on the pressure as I cross the midline, again scoring deeper as I get to the midpoint between the midline and the semler notch on the other side, and easing up and scoring a little bit less to nothing as I'm approaching the semler notch on the other side. Now that I've done that, I need to further adjust this soft portion of the model that duplicates the soft palate to ensure that the butterfly shape of the soft palate is depressed evenly. So if I do have to make an adjustment with this denture, let's assume that maybe the patient feels that it's too long and you need to cut it back. If you only score that little bit, then you're minimizing the seal of the denture. So what we're going to do to further enhance the seal and possibly compensate for the fact that the patient might feel this denture is too long, so you need to cut it back, we're going to further score this area. And what we're going to do, we're going to take an instrument. You can take the back of your Lacron carver, or you can take the back of your number 7 spatula. I find the Lacron carver a little bit better. And we're going to start again to the midpoint where you see this little green line. And I'm going to start from here, find the bottom of that score line, and I'm slowly going to feather towards the junction of the soft and hard palate. So I'm going to use a lot of pressure here. So I got the bottom of that score line, the initial score line, and then now I'm going to slowly feather that to nothing as I get to the junction. Not just there, I have to do it throughout. On both sides. Nothing really in the middle. Just kind of redefine the back of that a little bit. So just to show you with a sharp pencil, this is where the surface of the model was before I scored it. This is where I made my little depression. And you see the difference there. And you can clearly see that the deepest score was halfway between the Hemler notch and the midline. And I gently feathered everything towards the junction of the hard and soft palate. So I'll do it again on the other side. Now, because of the nature of the tool going back and forth, you're going to create a lot of irregular striations on your model. And you really don't want that. You want a nice smooth finish to this. So what I like to typically do after I do that, I'll turn it over and I'll go in with my fond stock. And I'll gently go back and smooth everything out. This is a key element to ensure that you have a proper fit of the maxillary denture and to maximize the suction effect by creating this posterior palatal seal that fully depresses the soft palate, engages all of the soft palate without causing trauma to the patient. So the next step is to block out